Hey, welcome everybody to Spirituality Adventures. We're glad you're tuning into this episode. We are a viewer and listener supported podcast, so we really appreciate you listening, watching on YouTube. We really encourage you to subscribe to whatever platform you're using. If you're on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, or if you're on Apple or however you listen to a podcast, be sure and subscribe. We greatly appreciate it. Also, make comments if you like it and share it if you like it. We really need people to make comments and share the episodes that you like. And then also, if you're not already a supporter, we really would encourage you to go to spiritualityadventures.com and you can pick a tier, and we have bonus content for every type of giver. This is a nonprofit, so they're tax-deductible donations, but we do provide bonus content for those who are supporters. So be a part of the team, help support Spirituality Adventures, and we're so glad you're tuning into this episode. Hey, welcome everybody to Spirituality Adventures, and thanks for tuning into this episode. Today, we're interviewing Doug Weaver. Doug, thanks for being on Spirituality Adventures.
Of course, I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, I have a longtime family friend, Lauren Hassler, who is actually the administrator for Spirituality Adventures and for the church that I pastor, Living Water Christian Church. And Lauren is the one that introduced me to you, Doug. She's like, you got to watch Doug Weaver on TikTok and Instagram. So I started following you and watching your posts, and she was just telling me all about your artistic world. So I was going, well, we need to get Doug on our podcast. So thanks for doing this. You guys went to college together, is what I understand.
We did. We went to undergrad together. We were in our college Bible study. It was called Crossfire Ministries, and we were in that together. That's how I know Lauren.
Awesome. So I'm curious, because of all your social media content and how you cover thousands of different topics in short reels, but then your sort of life as an artist. Give us a little bit of your backdrop, your origin story. What kind of family did you grow up in? Where did you grow up? Was there a faith orientation in your family or not? Those kind of things.
Yeah, I grew up in Oregon in a small town called St. Helens, Oregon, and my family was a big theater family. So my dad is always doing a play. He's still doing theater. In fact, right now he is practicing to be Tevye in uh in that play that Tevye's in. And so I grew up with lots of costumes and theater all around. And I also did grow up in the church. I grew up in an Assemblies of God church. So it was a charismatic church. And my dad was the youth pastor and the worship minister. And he also did all of the accounting for that church. He did a lot. So that's the environment I grew up in.
You're a
And
PK.
then when I was
You're a PK. We call it pastor.
I am kind of a PK. Yeah, I guess so. He was never really, I don't think he ever intended to be a youth pastor. I think he was just the person that was there.
Mm.
And it's a role he kind of fell into. He was more passionate about singing. So yeah, we grew up in that church, and then while I was in high school, I kind of bounced around churches. There was different youth groups on different nights. So I would go to a Baptist church on Tuesday, Assemblies of God on Wednesday, and then there was another one on Thursday that I just went to all the youth groups because it was fun and there's not much to do in St. Helens.
So so was faith an important part of your life then, it sounds like?
Yeah, yeah, really. In fact, I met my wife when I was 16 on LiveJournal, which is an online journaling community. And the group that we met in was called Jesus Freaks on LiveJournal.
Wow.
So it was kind of like an online messaging board that we met on there.
Was this a nod to the rock and roll band DC Talk, Jesus Freaks kind of thing?
It sure was. That was a very common term then.
Yeah. See, I really was a Jesus freak. I grew up, I was a teenager in the 70s, got saved in the Southern Baptist Youth Camp. My hair was long, and, we'd hand out gospel tracts, handed tickets out for God, as John, as the Tiny Dancer song sings. Anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so what you went to college in Columbia, Missouri. How in the world did you go from Oregon to Columbia? Because this is where you and Lauren met.
Well, my wife is from Missouri. And so we started talking online when we were 16. And then when I was 17, I flew to Missouri and met her for the first time. And we started like officially dating. And then I moved to Missouri when I was 18 for college,
Mhm.
but really because she's here. And so she went to Mizzou. So I applied to schools in Columbia, Missouri.
Hmm. So you were an art major in your undergrad, or
No, I
uh,
started out as a psychology major, and then I was an education major and a communication major, and eventually changed to art because I wasn't really passionate about all of those other things. I was somewhat passionate, but I kind of really like studying as many things as I can, and art gives me the ability to really explore as many topics as I want because everything fits into the
Hmm.
arts.
So you went from Columbia to Fontbonne? I don't know how to say the name.
Fontbonne.
Is that how you say
Yeah, I did grad school at Fontbonne here in St. Louis, and Fontbonne just closed a couple years ago. It no longer exists. I don't know what that means about my degree, or I have no idea.
it? Sounded like they're
Uh,
transferring it over to Washington University or something like that.
yeah,
But
WashU bought the campus, but that
oh,
doesn't mean that my degree is now from WashU. I
okay,
wish it did, but it does not mean that.
okay,
Um, but it's like I don't. It doesn't really matter at this point because
yeah,
I'm not trying to teach at WashU or like Columbia University or something like that, so it doesn't really matter. Uh, and then after grad school, we went to the Peace Corps in Rwanda, and we were in Rwanda for 2 years. And then when we finished there, we came back to St. Louis and had our son, and we've been here for the last 10 years.
excellent, excellent. What drew? When did you start being drawn to the to art, to painting, to oils, to egg tempera, to encaustic? What
Yeah,
drew you to these things?
I've always loved art. I've always made art. When I was in high school, I was in AP art, and it's just something that I always enjoyed doing. So when I was in undergrad, I actually went on a choir scholarship. And so I was doing a lot of choir, but then I was also taking art classes because that's what I enjoyed. And it's just something I've always had a passion for. And as time went on, when I went into grad school, I started to discover a lot of different art forms and try out a lot of different art forms. And I ended up doing my master's thesis on recreating old medieval art supply recipes. So making paints the way that they made them in the 1500s. And so getting oils and making my own pigments and growing plants that I could use to extract color from. And I still do that. Um, which was really helpful when we went into the Peace Corps. Because I remember when we were being interviewed for the Peace Corps, they're like, "What do you do to relax?" And I'm like, "Well, I like to draw and paint." And they're like, "Well, you will not have access to art supplies in
Mm.
the Peace Corps. So you might need to come up with some other hobbies." And I'm like, "You don't understand. I make paint out of the earth." And that ended up being part of what I did in the Peace Corps. I had an arts group at the school that we made greeting cards, and we made egg tempera out of eggs and dirt and charcoal, and we would get tiny pieces of colored chalk that teachers had discarded, and we would crush those and make paint out of those. So we were making paint, making greeting cards, and selling them to tourists to try to get money to get art supplies for the school. So it ended up being really useful while we were there because That was the only way to do art there.
That's fascinating. It when I was reading about that in your on your website, I mean, it reminded me of like a chef who, you know, does everything from scratch, locally sources everything, and you're doing that in your artwork with your the actual paint that you use. Like you make your own oil paints. Is that?
I do.
Yeah.
And I make watercolors and encaustic and all of the things that you make.
Yeah, and
I
tell
don't do acrylics.
that's what. Yeah, I saw that. So tell us, for those of us who aren't very knowledgeable of art, what is encaustic art? And then what is egg tempera? Because those two stuck out. I actually looked them up, but those two kind of stuck out to me as things that fit with how you're making all the things that you use to do your artwork. Basically, you're
Yeah.
creating them.
So every paint is made with two things. You have a pigment that has color, and then you have a binder, which is the glue that holds it together. And so oil paint means that you're taking the pigment and you're mixing it with oil. And that's what the paint is. So encaustic means that you're mixing it with wax. So I get beeswax, so it smells really good and I like working with it. And so I get a lot of beeswax and I can melt that down and add the pigment to it. So you have to have it in like a muffin tin where you have a different color in each tin and it has to be on a hot plate and heated up. So it's liquid and then you paint with the colored wax.
And this
And
is
then, but it cools really, really fast. So you have to like paint with it. You get like one brush stroke before it cools on the brush, and you have to put it back into the hot wax. And then you have to fuse all of the wax together. So you have to like heat it up with a heat gun, but to get everything to melt together, but you can't melt it too much because then it like runs off of there, which a lot of old Russian icon paintings are encaustic. So a lot of like those early images of Christ, like the icon of Christ that is in Sinai at I think it's the monastery of Saint Catherine, I think is the location. That is encaustic.
mm. And this is usually on wood surfaces that you.
Yeah.
It's always on wood
I
or
mean, you can paint on other things, but you don't want it to flake off. If it's on canvas, the canvas can move around and it can kind of mess it up. So it's usually on something rigid. Usually it's on wood.
interesting. And then what about the egg tempera? I found that interesting.
Yeah, egg tempera.
Egg,
So
yeah.
tempura is like food.
Sure. Yeah.
Tempura, it's
Tempera. Sorry.
yeah, egg tempura is it's the same process. You have the pigment, but the binder, the glue is egg. So you use the egg yolk and you get just the yolk and then you puncture it and you get the yellow stuff from inside the yolk. And actually, the lipids, the fat that's in egg yolk, is the same kind of fat that is in uh, linseed oil. So it has the same fat that oil paint does. So you mix that with the pigment and you use that to paint with. But it dries in about 20 minutes. And then after it dries, it is waterproof and it will last hundreds of years.
Hmm.
So oil paint didn't really get popular until the 1500s. Before that, egg tempera was the main way that people painted. So if you look at artists like Botticelli, he painted entirely with egg tempera.
Wow. That is just fascinating. As a person who wasn't very artistic, I've always been fascinated with musicians. I can't sing or play, and then artists. But I'm a fan. I'm a fan. So that's so cool. Um, so I'm curious when you went to Rwanda. So you're already well into your. I mean, basically that was your first time to be teaching art. Is that right, or were you already doing that in your undergraduate and graduate work?
No, that was my first teaching experience was in Rwanda. Yeah.
And were you in an urban setting in a Rwanda or a rural setting?
Uh, it's a rural setting. It's like a big village for Rwanda, but it's like it's still smaller than any town you could think of in America. So they might consider it more urban, while we would consider it very rural.
Was there running water, electricity, all those kind of things where you were at?
We had electricity about an hour a day usually.
Okay.
Um, but we were at the teacher training college, so we were exceptional in that way. We did have electricity at our house, but that doesn't mean that most of the village had electricity. And we did have a spigot at our house. The water came out brown, and there was water, but it was basically just like river water that came into a pipe.
Mm,
And then we did have like kind of plumbing. So normally you have a latrine. Most of the places we went would have a latrine, which is just like a pit, and that's where you use the restroom. Our house did have it was kind of like a shower basin with a bigger hole in the middle, and that was our toilet. And it did have plumbing, but the plumbing just went out into our yard.
okay. Yeah.
So our cilantro grew great. We didn't realize that that's where all of our sewage was going because like there was a pipe, but the pipe kind of it was just kind of like what you would usually do for like a gray field for like it, yeah. So it was all ending up in the yard and making all of our plants really vigorous.
That's wild. What year were you there? What years?
We
Tw
were there 2013 to 2015.
and when was the big Rwanda
That was
genocide?
it. That was in 1994. So we were there for the 20th anniversary of the genocide.
Yeah.
And there is a week there that is the genocide week. And that week is intense. Everything is really serious. And we got invited to some of the events for Genocide Week, and we would go. It's a lot of people sharing their stories. It is a very emotional, very, very heavy week. So we were there for the 20-year anniversary. The next year, we that's when we decided to go on vacation. During Genocide Week, during our second year, we decided let's go to Tanzania. That's when we went to Zanzibar because we're like, if we're gonna miss a week, there's no school, there's no work that week, and it's just a heavy week, and it's not for us. So we left during the second year.
How did you spent 2 years? Is that or 26 months? It sounded like.
Yeah, 27 months.
Okay. How did that experience shape you, form you, change you, and then did that affect even your work with art?
I think it changed us in a lot of ways that it changed the way we think about community engagement. That I feel like a lot of young Christians grow up with this passion for service in some kind of way, but not really knowing what that service looks like. And I think what we learned a lot there is that you have this idea that you're going to go and make a big impact on this community. And you get there and you're like, well, this community has a big impact on itself.
Hmm.
And you are like very uh you do find that you have certain resources that other people have, and those resources can be beneficial, but you start to focus less on impacting the community as a whole. You can make a tiny micro impact on a whole community, but you can make a big impact on individuals. That a lot of that energy shifted from how can we benefit this community to how can we benefit these like people that we know who are now our friends and who we feel more integrated with. And then we're there and we're like, why are we so focused on doing this kind of service work in this African community when while we were there teaching, St. Louis public schools lost their accreditation? And St. Louis public schools were really struggling. And before we moved there, when we were in grad school, we lived in Normandy, Missouri, and Normandy School District lost its accreditation. And we're like, the schools where we were before we went to Rwanda are struggling s- in some ways more than the school we're teaching at in Rwanda.
Mm.
And so it did really change the way that we approach community and needs assessment and just service in general, and focusing more on integration and just being a part of a community, that has more value than trying to reach a community that you're not a part of.
Mm. Um, so in your artistic statement on your website, you mentioned how and you said you hadn't updated that website in a long time when we were talking previously, but I'm guessing, like, because you talk about community and cultural development being one of your big priorities with your artwork. Did that perspective emerge from your experience in Rwanda? The community perspective, the community development perspective?
I think so. But before we went to Rwanda, my wife, she got her degree in social work.
Oh,
And so she has her master's in social work and her master's in education.
okay.
And she has her bachelor's in psychology and her bachelor's in poetry. So she is a very well-rounded individual. And so while she was in grad school, we were living in Normandy, in North City. So we were learning a lot about systemic racism,
Mm,
specifically in St. Louis, but at the same time, we were living in an area where we were the only white people. And
hmm
it's kind of like we would learn something in one of her classes about the systems that uh, support racism in St. Louis, and then we would see it play out in our neighborhood. And so that is something that we were very aware of before going into the Peace Corps. And then when we moved back to St. Louis, she was working in social work, and then she also for a while taught middle school English here in St. Louis. And then I did some work as a caseworker for Catholic Charities doing homelessness prevention
mm,
due to gentrification in South St. Louis.
mm.
So we've done a lot of work very directly with community and community development.
That's cool. I love that. Remind me, I don't know Rwanda's history very well. Who colonized Rwanda? Which country?
The Belgians.
Okay.
And they caused a lot of problems.
Yeah.
So the Belgians
Surprise, surprise,
colonized
right?
Belgians colonized Rwanda, and they created a caste system. So the Tutsi and Hutu conflict, those were two people groups that existed in Rwanda, but they didn't have the entrenched hatred until after colonization.
Mhm.
So the Belgians came in and they issued IDs. They kind of separated these two groups, and they're like, the Tutsis look more European. They're taller and are a little bit lighter skinned. So we're going to say that they are naturally the leaders.
Mm,
Uh, and so they gave them IDs and privileges and made them in charge of government, and then made IDs for the Hutus, which was a much larger population. But it was very arbitrary classifications where they would measure their noses to see if they're Hutu or Tutsi, and look at the shape of their skull. And there was a lot of phrenology. It was all based on eugenics. And so they created these groups. You would have siblings where one would be given a Tutsi ID and one would be given a Hutu ID. Um, so that was like that whole conflict that did grow and expand and eventually turn into the genocide in Rwanda is directly rooted in the colonization by the Belgians.
mm. Fascinating. I, I was curious because it sounds like you grew up in a fairly conservative evangelical environment, and uh, since the time I've been paying attention to you the last year or so. Seems like you've landed in a much more progressive space, although it sounds like you still have a love for Jesus. And, I mean, myself included, I've deconstructed in so many different ways, and I'm not uptight about any of that. But I was curious in terms of your own, if you want to call it evolution of faith. It definitely sounds like you've moved to a much more progressive space in your following of Jesus. And so like systemic, when you're talk about systemic injustice, you probably didn't hear that too much in your AG church in Oregon, right?
No.
Probably didn't hear
Well, and it's like
post-colonial liberation theology in your church in Oregon, I'm guessing,
absolutely not. So, well, and it's one of those things that like you learn these things over time. I now realize that the town I grew up in Oregon was like 97% white. And that didn't seem strange to me growing up there because it's where I grew up.
Right.
Moved to St. Louis, where there is diversity, and
Mhm.
I'm like, whoa, this is totally different. Now, when I go back home to my hometown, I'm like, this is so weird.
Right.
It's so weird that everyone looks the same. And it's so bizarre, but then when you look into it, you realize that it actually was written into the Oregon Constitution that only white people could own property. And that my hometown had in the books that people of color could not pass through the town without a police escort, that I lived in a sundown town. And the cafe that I went to on the corner, the Cozy Corner Cafe, all spelled with K's, and
Whoa.
that there is a reason that the town I grew up in is very white, that was on purpose.
Mhm.
And like, so there is a little bit of learning the history of the place you grew up in, where no one talks about the history of the place. No one talks about why it is the way that it is. And Oregon as a whole was kind of designed that way.
Mm.
And then when you realize, oh, this is an intentional design, this is an intentional structure that is harmful, that's when you're like, well, the systemic
Yes.
issue, systemic racism isn't something that just happened over time. It was very intentional. And then living in St. Louis, you see a lot of like St. Louis was redlined, and St. Louis was one of the places that pioneered restrictive covenants, writing into the deed of a property that it could never be owned by a person of color. That,
Same in Kansas City. I think we were just a little further west. They used to call
yeah,
St. Louis as the last city of the East, and Kansas City the first city of the West. But we still have all that same stuff that you're describing in Kansas City. Yeah.
yeah.
Sure.
And so when you're dealing with like, we were foster parents for a while when we came back to St. Louis, and like one of our foster kids, her father was in prison uh, in the South, and so we did some research into their family, and their last name is still the same name as the plantation owner in the town that her family came from, and the penitentiary that her father is in used to do convict leasing to the plantation that their family historically were enslaved at. And so, and it's still a convict leasing penitentiary. So it's like when you see those things that you're like, okay, this is super messed up. It's really messed up. It's crazy and it's messed up. But it's like once you start to see some of those things and the way that they play out, you can't unlearn that. You
Yeah.
can't go back to ignoring that those systems exist.
Yeah. Yeah. The racism of our incarceration prison system is more than documented, right? It's crazy.
Yeah.
Um, so this is fascinating to me because at what point did so you moved back to St. Louis from Rwanda. you start as an art teacher, your wife's doing social work of some sort, I guess. You're very community minded. Your faith is moving into a more progressive area. You're becoming aware of post-colonial theology, liberation theology, probably different types of theology that you probably weren't introduced to as a kid. And at some point, you start doing social media stuff. Because right now, folks who are listening, Doug has over 1 million followers just between TikTok and Instagram, okay? Most of this is short reel stuff, right? With you just commenting on any number of 1,000 things. When did you start doing your social media stuff, and how did it morph into what it is today?
You see, I started because we had a friend that was like, "Hey, Doug, you are a good storyteller. You should start a TikTok account and tell some stories about your time in Rwanda." So that's when I started it. I started telling some stories about living in Rwanda. I had a video go viral talking about my mom and the way she raised my brothers and I. And she did like curriculum with us at home called Husbands in Training, that we would get home from school and we'd sit around the kitchen table and we had classes where we would learn about essentially how to be a decent person and to navigate society. And so that video went viral, and then it's just been a lot of
Now,
work building a
was this
platform since then.
curriculum more of a, I'm sorry to, is this curriculum more of a patriarchal, hierarchical kind of husband view? Or was it
Yeah,
more wholesome than that?
it was definitely more wholesome than that. A
Okay.
lot of it was like we had quizzes on pornography and the porn industry. We had like eating etiquette classes were a part of it. And so it did have some elements of chivalry. And like a lot of the things that we learned are now would be very outdated. But it was the best my mom could create from scratch in the 90s and early 2000s about how to be the best husband and partner that we could be. But a lot of it was like how to communicate well and making sure that your partner saves face and not embarrassing your partner in public and when to have certain conversations and just navigating different social scenarios.
Hmm.
So I think that was a cool thing that she did.
Yeah.
And so did a lot of other people.
Interesting. Interesting. So that went viral. So
Mhm.
what, at some point, you get enough things going viral that you pretty much have built a semi career out of this, right?
I've been doing social media as my primary occupation for the last 2 or 3 years. And it is exhausting, but it's good in some ways. And so it's always shifting. That like sometimes I make some decent money out of it. Sometimes I don't, and it's not reliable as a career. So I have a lot of different income streams. So I have art that I am making to get income from. I have social media, and then I have my community workshops. I do a lot of grants.
Mm.
I apply for grants through the Regional Arts Commission, and I use that grant money to get supplies to do workshops in the community. And yeah, so I have a variety. Oh, and then like more formal teaching that I do from time to time, that I have a lot of different ways that I create income, and sometimes they all kind of balance out to be enough.
Yeah. Interesting. How old you have one child? Is
Yeah. Our son, he is 10 years old.
10. Okay. And is your wife doing social work as well in the community, like very community oriented?
Now she is working with hospitals and she does supply for hospitals. So she writes and negotiates contracts for a network of about 30 hospitals.
Hmm.
So she works from home now.
Okay. Interesting. So some of your reels that I've just watched. Okay, I want to kind of have some fun with this a little bit. So like one of them. So I also looked you up on other podcasts that you had done. And I found this one where it was two women that talk about sex. Okay, this was a couple 2 or 3 years ago. I guess they interviewed you from an. It sounded like you were on audio with them, but evidently you had
Okay.
posted a reel, which I didn't see because this was before I was watching some of your stuff. But you evidently posted a reel on a bad night of sex with your wife, and it must have gone viral because these two women wanted you on their podcast to talk about this whole incident of like uh it was kind of like an example of what could have gone wrong, really wrong with toxic masculinity, and you kind of backed off and provided some sensitivity to this bad night of sex with your wife. And I just so I'm like going, so when you so like that's one example of I'm going to ask you a couple more examples that but tell did that go viral? Did you just make a comment about a bad night of sex on a reel, and was that one of your viral ones? Or
That was that was actually several videos. So that started with my wife having some conversations with her friends about sex, about their sex lives. And it's one of those things that they started describing some of the things that happened that they've had happen in their sex lives. And Kristen's like, "Oh, that's not good. That doesn't sound fun at all." And so I made some videos about like people having bad sex. And so I asked people to give us a list, like just in the comments, tell me like the worst sexual experiences that you've had. And so we made a list of all of everyone's worst sexual experiences, and we decided we're going to have bad sex night, and we're just going to do all of the things on the list. My wife and I were going to do those together, and they were bad.
yeah.
A lot of them were like, some of them were wild that people have actually had done. Like one of them is like text uh, another woman in the middle of while you are having sex. And then there's one that's like email them in the morning about the things that they did wrong. And like there were music choices that were bad and like but then there's a lot of like other things like not like moving too fast and like proceeding when they're not ready and like going from like 0 to 100 and um there's other things that I don't know if you want mentioned on your podcast. So it's just like
We've
there's like
we've been all
things
over the map on this podcast, I promise you. So
like there were people talking about a move that they called the Exorcist that people are doing in the bedroom. People are doing wild things in the bedroom,
yeah,
but not
yeah,
in a good
yeah.
way. And so
Good
we
way.
had bad sex tonight. We made uh
So you're kind of
a
like role
playlist.
playing all these bad examples
Yeah, we
with a
were
with a kind of a fun vibe to it, right?
yeah, so we made a music playlist of like bad songs to like songs that are not sexy. We had the VeggieTales theme song on there, and
Ah,
it is it's not it didn't do it for us. Anyway,
Phil Vischer would be so proud of you, right? He's the
but
creator of Veggie Tales, anyway. Phil.
I bet that song does not often end up on someone's steamy playlist.
Right.
So, but we had bad sex night, and then but one of the issues that we
I
had
think you
was
need some
that
good
like
hip hop music, is what you really need, Anyway, so
oh, it was something else. So one of the issues that we ran into is that like knowing that she's not enjoying any of this, I'm like my body was just not doing what it needs to do. Like my body just shut like I can't do the next things because like I just it's just not my body's not doing what it's supposed to do. Uh so which I'm like I'm fine with that. Like if my wife isn't I now know that if I don't think my wife is having a good time, I cannot physically proceed.
Yeah.
So, which is a good thing to find out. But
Yeah,
then we also
exactly.
had to stop and be like, we need to establish safe words, because part of what we're doing is that, like, this part of the activity is doing things you don't like. And I need to, we need to know that this is consensual. And so we need to stop and establish, like, how are we going to know that I'm not actually violating you?
Yeah.
Uh, and then, but that also, like, was kind of like made it a little bit more serious when we're like, we have to establish some ground rules for this, because so many of these experiences that people have had are actually sexual assault,
Hmm.
that people are being
Even
sexually
even
assaulted by their
within a
partner.
committed relationship or even within a marriage, this toxic patriarchy, hierarchy, masculinity, submit to me, all this kind of BS, call it bullshit, uh, is uh, is happening all across America, and I think on an increase right now because of our current uh, toxic patriarchy, hierarchy administration. I think
Well, I think it's one of those things that it's kind of healing for us in a way to have open conversations about sex and sexuality. And
Mhm.
I do make posts, and I talk about sex, and I think it's good for us to talk about sex and consent.
Mhm.
And it's one of those things that, growing up in purity culture, my wife and I both growing up in purity culture,
Mhm.
that, like, there weren't a lot of conversations about consent,
Right.
because the idea was that you're not going to do anything till you're married. And then once you're married, consent doesn't exist. You own each other's bodies. And
Yep.
so there's kind of like an avoidance of discussions about consent within purity culture, where we're like, we need to have these conversations, and we need to see what these conversations look like.
Yeah.
And that a lot of people are being hurt because they're just not prepared to have a sexual relationship. So we do cover a lot of those topics, and sometimes it's awkward, sometimes it's funny, but I think it's always important. But it is hard to have those conversations even online, because there's certain terms that you have to be careful using. In short form videos, I have to
You can get
censor
pulled down
myself.
because of they'll they'll pull you down because of saying certain things. Is that
If
right?
you say rape, if you say sexual assault, if you say, there's a lot of terms that if you say them, that it's going to hurt your views. Long form content, it doesn't hurt as much. In a short form video, you kind of just can't say certain words. But I'm like, we need to have conversations about those things. Like, conversations about rape and rape culture are really, really important.
Hmm.
And there's so many people, especially young people, that only get their information and only consume short form media,
Yep.
which means that they are not having access to healthy conversations about
Yeah.
sex and sexuality and consent and relationships.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
they do have access to a lot of horrifying things.
Yeah. Yeah. That was fascinating. And I appreciated, the stand that you took about what consent is, even within the context of committed relationships. And I like to call it enthusiastic consent. Yeah, which is the only kind, yeah, that I would be interested in anyway. So, um,
You'd think everyone would feel that way.
but they don't, right?
That, like,
Yeah.
because I recently learning about the online community, where a lot of men were having conversations online about drugging their wives and and until they're asleep, and then using them. And I'm just thinking, like, one, that's shocking, but, like, the idea of, like, I don't know. I think I would only be interested in, having sexual experiences with an awake person who is participating and having fun. Like, I think it's just
Hmm.
it's wild that anyone could enjoy that.
Hmm. Yeah. There, there's a lot of weird fetishes in this world, and abusive ones. Absolutely. Um, Random things like your nails, painting your nails. I just saw you did one on why you paint your nails.
I actually started painting my nails during the COVID lockdown. And normally when people ask, why do you paint your nails? I just say it's because it's fun, because I like it, because it's pretty. I like looking at I look at my hands all the time and I think it looks nice. Who doesn't love a pop of color? I'm an artist. I have color around me all the time. Um, but
Are,
when I started
are
painting
the
my nails,
colors on your nails all homegrown
no,
from your own garden?
no, I have made nail polish. It's a lot of work.
Uh,
And this is gel polish, so it's a whole different thing. Um, it would be fun to make a line of nail polish, but I have enough projects going on. When I actually started painting my nails, we were fostering and COVID happened, and it was a very, very hard time, very traumatic time. And we had a foster kid at the time that really liked painting her nails. And so it was a really hard time for her. And so it's something that we all started doing together during the lockdown. Um, and so I think that it's just something we started doing as a family. And then I still do it. I've painted my nails ever since.
yeah.
I just enjoy it. But then it's also important for me to be an example for my son because I remember when I was growing up, I always liked bright colors. I would wear bright colors. I think I was in theater, I was in choir, I was in art. I had all kinds of things said about me and that like I'm not I'm not a real man. I'm not enough of a man. Um it was very common for gay to be an insult, especially growing up in a conservative town that people called me gay all the time. And it's one of those things that like I do think it's important for my son to see me not caring about those things. Because, everyone has some of that growing up. You have some of that, like, this is a girl thing, this is a boy thing. You're not allowed to like these colors. You get that. And my son experiences that. And it's one of those things that, like, really driving home that, like, having colors on your fingers really doesn't mean anything. That it isn't this big thing. It doesn't like make you some different species. It doesn't make you not a man. It doesn't have any impact on anything else other than you like having some color on your hands. And it's one of those things that like uh I don't think my son I don't think anyone has called him gay in school. I could see that happening eventually. Um, and but we're also where we live is a little bit more progressive. I think those insults are less common here than where I grew up. And but it's just one of those things that it's like I remember questioning my own sexuality and questioning a lot of things about myself when I was young. And a lot of that was the assumptions people made about me and the things that were said about me. And I think it was good that I explored my sexuality and got to understand it. And like, I grew up and realized I am a straight man. Um, but it's harder in this world where people apply so much meaning to everything that we do. The clothes that you wear, the timbre of your voice. People make assumptions about everyone that they meet. And I think it's good for my son to see that we don't have to listen to those assumptions and we can figure ourselves out on our own. That we don't have to go down a path that someone else has decided we are supposed to go down, and we don't have to change who we are to match someone else's expectation. We don't have to anticipate what bullies might do and bully ourselves into being someone that we're not. That if we like to paint our nails, we can paint our nails and it means whatever we want it to mean.
Yeah, yeah. Um, you know, I when I in my I definitely grew up strong evangelical, and then I started pastoring this vineyard church. Over the course of my career as the vineyard pastor, I was always moving in a more progressive direction. Social, racial justice issues were important to me. The movement that I was a part of drew a hard line. They were very progressive with diversity and social justice, racial justice, but they ended up drawing a hard line on the LGBTQ plus issue. And I had been pastoring LGBTQ plus people since the 90s and originally started out, you know, loving and not condemning, but also at the same time thinking it was helpful for them to, you know, get healed and not be gay anymore. So the Pray the Gay Away, the Exodus International stuff and all that. But over the course, and most of the people that came to my church that were from that community had grown up in shame-based sexual environments and were themselves trying to pray the gay away, right?
Hmm.
So I thought I was doing a good thing. But after 10 years of that, I watched them not be less gay and hate themselves more because they felt like a failure. And so I had to start rereading and reshifting my perspective on that. And now I pastor an open and affirming church, and we have, you know, trans and lesbian and all kinds of different varieties of sexual expression and who you love and all that kind of stuff. And what's interesting for me is that from my old crowd, I've been more condemned for probably being pro LGBTQ and anti-Trump than I have for anything else that they might have wanted to, you know, shoot some darts at me. I think I've been called more of a false shepherd, just for those two stances, you know. When did you start grappling with that LGBTQ plus issue?
I think it's something that has always been on the forefront of my mind. I think it's not something new for me. I was actually I helped found the Gay Straight Alliance at my high school.
Oh, wow.
It's something I was always very close with, and I think part of it is just that like when you're an artist and you're in theater and choir, you tend to be around the queer community a lot. And it's one of those things where like it's one of those things that when you know people, it's hard to hate the people you know. It's really easy to hate people you've never met.
Right.
And once you meet people, it's just harder to hold that hateful ideology.
Mm.
And that's where, like, when we were in St. Louis and I started doing some work with the Winter Outreach, which is a group here in St. Louis that helps the unhoused find shelter when it gets really cold. And through that, I met a lot of people here in St. Louis that work with the unhoused community. And one person in particular that really has done a lot, especially through COVID. She made sure that the unhoused got food, that they had resources and didn't just starve during COVID. And it's like one of the people that is most integral to the care of the unhoused community is a woman named Sharon, and she's a lesbian. And she is just a phenomenal person. And I remember asking her once what her religious views are, and her saying that, like, well, I'm Christian-y. Like, and I feel like it's one of those things that, like, she grew up Christian and a lot of her moral compass came from Christianity. A lot of her identity and the reason that she originally started doing what she does came from Christianity, but she has been largely rejected by the Christian church.
Mm.
And I think that's something that I find a lot of, like joining the Peace Corps and when you're working in these social services, like a lot of church structures, a lot of churches want to serve the community, but often expect the community to come to the church for service.
Mhm.
And when you are going out to a community in need, often the people that are going out to that community don't fit the church's idea of what a Christian is.
Mm.
And when I say church, I mean the evangelical church and like the church I grew up in.
Yeah, yeah.
That you see that I'm like, all the people that I know that live out their lives in a way that is in alignment with the teachings of Christ would feel very uncomfortable in a church pew.
Mm. Mm.
And a lot of them have vowed to never set foot in a church again.
Mhm.
And that's such a weird feeling that you're like, I know a lot of self-proclaimed Christians, who uh, who cause a lot of harm
I agree.
and support a lot of views that can't be reconciled with the teachings of Christ.
Mm,
And that it really makes you start to think that like, what are we doing? What are our priorities?
mhm,
And like when we when we go out and seek out people that we think are Christ-like, what when we find them, like when I think of the people that I think are Christ-like,
mhm.
I mean some of them claim Christianity, a lot of them don't.
Yeah.
And it is a lot to reconcile. And I think some of that comes with just kind of like when you start reading through the Bible and attempting to understand it, there's a lot of things, there's a lot of questions that you end up with that are very difficult to get answered. Because when you want things answered without a tradition behind the answer, that like I want to understand this in a spiritual sense and not in a traditional sense.
Mhm.
And I think that is where it can be very difficult um, to deconstruct and process Christianity within a Christian setting.
Mm.
So I make videos, and sometimes I make videos about Christianity. I did a series of videos called Bad Bible Readings,
Okay. Yeah.
and I did them on Sundays. And essentially, they were reading Bible stories without the traditional interpretation,
Right.
without any kind of buttering up.
Hmm.
Just like this is what the story is,
Hmm.
very clear and plain, a little bit sarcastic. And because there's some Bible stories that are just really uncomfortable.
Oh, and the arc is a little problematic.
Yeah, you have like Jephthah and his daughter. That's not a fun story. Even the story of Samson. I remember reading Samson the first time as an adult, and I'm like, oh man,
Yeah.
I don't know that he's a hero. Why are we taught that Samson is a hero? Samson is all over the place. Like he's a bit there's a lot of problematic things about him. Like doing these weird riddles and that are unsolvable, and then when they solve them, he's like, I'm mad that I lost, and so I'm just gonna like kill a bunch of people
Hmm.
because of it. I'm gonna like yeah, there's a lot of like tying foxes' tails together and then setting them on fire. Like that's not normal behavior. And so like reading some of those stories and like, David collecting 200 foreskins when he only needed to collect 100 to buy a wife. Like these are crazy stories. And so just telling some of these Bible stories, and I'm like, a lot of people think that I'm very anti-Bible when I read these stories. But I'm like, these are the stories of the Bible. It's just I am reading them out of context. But I think like often we miss out on the context of the Bible and what it is. Like the Bible as a library. Um, I think I never had the concept growing up that the Bible was when it was compiled, it was like they collected all of these Jewish writings that like the Jewish people had become scattered and the writings had got scattered with them. So when they recollected as a people and then they started to collect their texts again, they were collecting poetry and songs, they were collecting plays and origin stories and morality tales. Some things even read as tall tales, and so like it's this entire collection, just like a collection of wise sayings, and then like sex poems. Like there's so much variety in what was collected that like it makes so much sense as a library when you view it as a library
Yeah.
that you have different books and those different books have different functions. Like one book is the law that like you wouldn't take like stories about Paul Bunyan and the Constitution and put them together and be like, these are the same.
Yeah.
And but that's kind of what we do with the Bible is that we have all of these different books that have had very different uses when they were written.
Yep.
We've compiled into one book that is kind of all over the place.
Yep.
And I think I really focus on I really enjoy the Bible as literature. I really enjoy the Bible as a library of books, a
Sure.
library of text.
Yeah, like an anthology. And I like to say, there's some bad characters in the Bible, and there's some really bad ideas about God in the Bible, too. It's like, I mean, seriously, there's some beautiful ideas about God in the Bible. There's some really bad ideas about God in the Bible, too. And it's a compendium of like all these ideas that have been out there circulating in the Jewish and ancient Near Eastern world, and even in the first century Greco-Roman period. Yeah. Well, I tend to do that in my preaching a little bit, is just tell a straight story, and then and then people are, it's like if you preach the Bible, really, it's pretty X-rated. I
It's
mean,
very
there's some
yeah,
anyway,
if they actually made like a video series that is like
on point. Yeah.
the Bible
Uh-huh.
as written,
Yeah.
man, there would be some episodes that would be just
Yeah.
it would be
Yeah.
very X-rated. Um,
Exactly.
yeah. Well, and it's something that I really enjoy about the Bible is that when I started getting into plants, one of the things that happened when I was in Rwanda is that I learned about a tree in Rwanda and learning about some of their traditional spiritual practices, that they have ancestral spirits. And one of their ancestral spirits is a guy named Ryangombe. And there is a tree associated with the spirit of Ryangombe, which is called an umuko tree. And there was also a tree in the village that we were in that was called Ibiti Bimana Byabagore, which is the tree of the god of women, um, which is kind of like a pilgrimage site that people would go to when they are seeking fertility. So a lot of women would go and sit under this tree, and then the idea would be that you would be able to get pregnant after that.
Mm.
But there's a lot of this idea of spirits connected with trees and trees having a certain spirituality to them. But then while I was reading through the Bible in Rwanda, I'm like, there are a ton of Bible
Yeah.
passages where trees are connected to cultures and people and spiritual groups. Trees have a lot of meaning. That one of the things that the Hebrew people would do when they conquer another group is to cut down the sacred groves, cut down these trees that have spiritual connotations. And then you have olive trees meaning something. You have two trees in the garden. You have the fig tree that Jesus curses. Like you have trees showing up over and over again. The almond branch of Aaron,
Yeah.
that there is the spiritual significance to trees. And then the burning bush that which is commonly thought of as it's a kind of acacia. And I grew one of those trees for a while. I had one. And like doing some research into the kind of tree that the burning bush was, which
Mm.
is also the kind of tree that the Ark of the Covenant was made out of, was made out of acacia. That kind of acacia tree in Sinai with Bedouins uh, is considered a tree that accepts the spirits of the dead. That the spirits of your ancestors exist in that tree. So when you want to meditate on and think about your ancestors, you sit under one of those acacia trees, and that it is considered equal under the law as murder if you cut down one of those trees.
Mm.
Like cutting down one of those trees is considered murdering the
Mm.
ancestors
Mm.
of who
Interesting.
owned
Yeah.
that tree.
Mm.
So, knowing that that's the tree that was the burning bush, that's the tree that the Ark of the Covenant was made out of, that what was the tree that was cut down to make the Ark of the Covenant? And who
Or the
sat under that
or
tree?
the cross.
Or the cross.
Yeah.
What kind of wood was
I
the
don't
cross
know.
made
I
of?
actually don't know. It made me think of that though when you're saying all this. It's like, but
That
yeah,
like
for sure.
was there in early in early Hebrew thinking, were there ancestral spirits associated with the tree that was cut down and carried with them as the Ark of the Covenant? Was the Ark of the Covenant kind of a spiritual representation of the Abrahamic family? Did it come from a tree that Abraham sat under? And those are things that I'm like, I find all of that very fascinating. But the more when you start to get into like, I'm really interested in the spirits contained within trees, then Christians are like, I don't know about that. That doesn't sound very Christian to me. But I'm like, it actually like there is a lot of Christian or like there is a lot of spirituality in plants. I mean, Jesus being given a frankincense and a myrrh tree at his birth, like we should we be like distancing ourselves from this idea of plant-based spirituality? It's very much in the Bible, but it's not. Evangelicals don't like the idea of plant-based spirituality because it sounds like witchcraft or something else.
Yeah.
Something.
Trees are alive. They communicate. They grow better together. They communicate through the root tips. The mushroom fungi connects the root tips. Oregon has one of the largest mushroom fields of, I can't even remember how many miles of square miles it is. It's the largest living organism in the world in Oregon, actually. And
Oh, I believe
it's the fungi
Oregon's so wet.
connecting the
Perfect
trees, right?
for
Yeah.
mushrooms.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, I'm all into that kind of stuff. So well, man, we are running out of time, Doug, but I could go on like this forever. Good stuff. Well, yeah. Well, thanks so much for being on Spirituality Adventures. Let's do a quick your website, Doug Weaver Art dot is it org?
It's .org. Yeah,
Dot
because it's free.
org. Yeah, you can check your artwork out there. You've got a lot of examples of your artwork and some of the art series and commissions that you've done there. I love the art for volunteerism, your Peace Corps Rwanda series, your archetypes, the 12 people who encountered Jesus. And then as well, your TikTok and Instagram, which is so much of your work now. What's your handle on those? Is it just
I'm Doug Weaver Art on everything.
everything? Okay. So check it out. It's a lot of fun, off the wall, humorous many times, and I've enjoyed it. So, but yeah, thanks for sharing. I love your heart on all this stuff, and I appreciate it. I was surprised to find out you're attending a disciple church too in St. Louis. So
Yeah.
hey.
And that's where my garden is. It's called the Rainbow Garden, and uh, I've had the garden at that church for 4 years now,
Okay.
growing dye
Cool.
stuff.
The regional minister for Missouri is Paul Koch, and he's a friend of mine. He oversees the regional, there's about 200 disciple churches in the state of Missouri, except for Kansas City. We have our own region with about 62 churches in the Kansas City region. So, yeah.
I think I've met him transporting kids to summer camp.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, driving down there and meeting. I think I've met him before.
Yeah. He also, he's a fan of Richard Rohr, which is a favorite spiritual mentor of mine. I'm not personally, but I've read all of his books and know a lot of his friends. So he's a Catholic Franciscan priest that I love dearly, and Paul is a fan of his as well. So, but yeah, well, thanks so much, and folks, tune in to Doug, and you'll have plenty of entertainment. So, but with some serious stuff as well, as we've talked about here. So, yeah, thanks, Doug.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We appreciate it. Take care. Have a great day. Hey, you made it to the end. Thanks for listening all the way through on this episode. By the way, if you're not already a supporter, go to spiritualityadventures.com, sign up for one of our monthly supports, and you will receive our bonus content. You'll receive lots of interesting information about our guests. Many of our musicians will do special bonus songs and record a song. So I want to encourage you to do that. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Be sure and subscribe. Be sure and share any of the episodes that you like. And be sure and make comments if you like them as well. This helps us get Spirituality Adventures out there to more listeners, more watchers. So whatever platform you're using, subscribe, like, share, make comments, and go to our website, sign up for our team, and be a part of the team support. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.